Hi, I'm Morgan. Welcome to Way of Living podcast, where you will hear empowering women talking about how you shouldn't feel stuck in an unfulfilling career and how to follow your dreams. Life is short, live it to the fullest, and I hope you will feel inspired by their stories. Moving across the Atlantic Ocean, finding home in a foreign country, Morton'S story is the pure inspiration for anyone who wants to try something new, anywhere this can be. The self-teaching queen never stops learning new skills, even when she's busy creating a website, teaching, or even launching her web design business. From her first trip to Paris as a student, to meeting a new friend in San Fransisco who will tell her about the Pink City in France, the American adventurous soul has now created a beautiful life in Toulouse. In this episode, she talks about her career as a teacher assistant in California, how she managed to get her dream job in France while working remotely, and why she learned coding. Hi Alex, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm great. Welcome to the podcast, Self-Teaching Queen, I would call you. So at the beginning of the podcast, I always ask the person to present themselves. If you would like to start.
Yeah. So I always say I'm Alex. I am currently at this time in my life a creative web developer. I'm in the middle of really teaching myself how to be a developer, a coder and a developer. And I really like to think of myself at the intersection of coding logic and creativity in terms of, I love everything about programming in terms of thinking of everything like a puzzle and putting things together, and then also being able to, if I have an idea for something I want to create, I can build it because I have these skills of being able to code and put it together on a computer. And so I think we'll definitely get into it through this episode, but it's been a long process of trying to figure out where I wanted to be or who I wanted to be in the world. I think I definitely have a very unconventional path. And despite that, I really think that I have learned so much from each little piece of the puzzle of that path, actually. To bring it all together, I'm in technology. For now, I'm self-employed. I do freelance, but then I'm also currently building up a community called Ladies Code Collective, which is a community of with whether self-taught developers or women in tech who want to get back to the creative side of coding or give their side projects enough time during the week, which maybe they either have kind of gotten caught up in busy lives and haven't really been able to express their creativity that much. That's the current project.
Yeah, you were saying about you were looking for where you wanted to be and what you wanted to do. Funny enough, you're obviously American and you live in Toulouse in France. How did this happen?
I'm American. I'm from California. After I graduated university in California, I ended up working at a preschool, a French immersion preschool, I went to UC Berkeley, and it was in Oakland, just the next city over. And I had majored in English literature. And so I think when you major in English literature, there's kind of this idea that maybe you'll probably go into teaching in some form or another. I definitely never thought I'd be involved in coding or programming at any point while I was in university, but I ended up teaching at this French immersion preschool, which really was not for me. I loved the kids, but then I think there was just the whole administrative, there were so many behind the scenes problems, and I didn't really like being a part of it. I did feel like a major fraud too, because I wasn't French, and I had studied French in school, but I didn't really speak it fluently. I didn't really feel super comfortable. So every day going into work and then having some parents really expecting, the best for their kids, they're paying $2,000 a month to go into this French immersion school. And so I was it was just so I don't know. It was so uncomfortable. But anyway, I ended up meeting our mutual friend Lori through there. We were both teaching. We both started out around the same time. And she was living in California, and she's French. And she came from Toulouse. And so that kind of put Toulouse on my map. I had studied in Paris while I was in university for a semester abroad, and I just loved it. I've always been so interested in French culture, especially in the differences between French and American women and how we're brought up and the differences and the different messages we received growing up. And so, yeah, when then I met Lori and she put Toulouse on my map, and I knew that I didn't want to stay in this job at the preschool. So I was like, okay, well, I do want to travel. I just finished university. So maybe I could move to France as an au pair for a few months. And so I ended up finding a family in Toulouse to be an au pair for. And I love this family. I still love them. They're really, I feel like they're my Toulouse family. We still keep in touch. And so I worked with them for a few months. And then when I left Toulouse to come back home, because it was a tourist visa, so I didn't have a necessarily au pair visa where it's like 1 year. So after 3 months, 90 days, I left, and I had never felt just so sad, like from like the deepest part of like where you feel like you shouldn't be leaving, like this is actually your place. And so I was like, okay, I have to come back. Ended up coming back as part of, it's called the Teaching Assistant Program in France for native English speakers. And also there's Spanish speakers, Italian speakers, and they're placed in public schools around France. It's a government sponsored program. And so I ended up coming as a teacher through that program to Toulouse again. And I ended up living with the same host family that I had lived with before. And then that was another episode of teaching, whereas like you're in a teaching assistant, so you have small groups of kids. You're not necessarily having like full groups, you don't need a teaching degree or anything. But that was another episode of feeling like such a fraud and feeling so nervous every day to go in. And even though that's exactly what you just had to be yourself, you just had to share your language, I would just feel so nervous to do it. And so eventually I told myself, okay, teaching isn't for me. I really need to find something else, or I can't keep pushing myself with something that's not natural to me and something that really doesn't make me feel comfortable or purposeful. And so when my teaching contract ended in the middle of 2018, I think, I ended up getting this amazing remote job with this American startup, and that allowed me to stay in France with my partner, who is French, and I didn't have to be a teacher. And so it was a customer support position, but fully remote in tech, really interesting. I learned so much. The people I worked with, it was a small team. It eventually had, I think there were around 30 people in the whole company, and everyone was just brilliant and you just learned so much.
When you came back in France with the teaching job, first of all, how did you find this opportunity that you could do that as an American? What kind of visa were you on? Because obviously this is two countries where you can't just go there, and it's like a whole process of visa and paperwork. So how did you do that first?
In terms of how I found the opportunity, I had this program on my radar for probably since the beginning of university. I think for Americans, but maybe for more, I don't know, for Americans, speaking for Americans, going and teaching abroad for a year after university is a very popular, not popular, but like a very well-known thing to do for some people if you don't necessarily go right into the corporate world or right into your career, or if you just need some sort of a gap year to really be able to go and experience things. I had been actually thinking about teaching either in South Korea, Japan, or France. And so I ended up applying there's a well-known teaching program in Japan, and I didn't get that one. And so, but I got the French one. So I was like, all right, I'm going to France.
Could you choose where in France?
You could rank where you wanted to be. And so that was when I ranked Toulouse to be first, because I wanted to go back and I already had that living situation set up. but you could rank where you wanted to be. And then I think the Ministry of Education would do their best to place you wherever. And then for the visa, it was a temporary work visa. So it was about the teaching contract itself each year was about 7 months long, 7 or 8 months long. It wasn't the full school year. And then the visa was around that same amount of time, maybe a month longer. But I was on that for the 2 years that I was a teacher. So when my visa expired, I would sometimes go home, or I went a couple of times to Morocco for some time to just, I don't know, it's so, like you said, like coming into France or even going to the US with visa situations, it's so complicated. And I feel like you just don't have a straight answer about where, like, okay, how long do I need to be away, or can I reset my visa by leaving for a weekend? So what I essentially did was I would let the temporary work visa run out, which was like 9 months long, and then leave the European Union, so to go to Morocco, come back, and then I would be on that 90-day tourist visa where you just need an American passport, and then I would just kind of make it work from there. Lots of trips back and forth as well to the US to get a new visa.
Well, that sounds complicated, and it's like you need to want it to actually manage it. After your full school year, so you had this visa for work and then it ended, but then you got this amazing job for this startup company based in the US. You could work remotely, but how did it work again for the visas?
For that situation, it's all different situations. So like I think that once you get good at kind of getting to know how one system works for a temporary visa, then when you're in a different stage in your life, it's like, okay, well, I can't use that. I need to go to the next step. And so that next step, when I was working for the American startup, so I was employed as an American employee, I ended up getting a 1-year tourist visa to France. And in that tourist visa, when I was putting together all the paperwork for the file, I was able to get, letters from my company saying, yes, like Alex works with us. She makes this salary each month. I had to show like my bank statements to show that I have enough money to support myself and wasn't necessarily going to be relying on the French government for anything. And so that, I think that's what makes it easier too, when the visa officials look and they say, well, she's employed, she's fine. She also is, my partner and I are PACs, like a civil union, So we also did that as well to show that, okay, well, she has a life in France. And so it ended up being the 1-year tourist visa from that point when I got that job. And then I think I ended up renewing it again once that ran out.
Oh, okay, that's interesting. How did you get that job? Because obviously you learned English at uni, you've been nannying, and you did teaching assistant jobs here and there.
The company, it's an email newsletter that sends out cheap flights, like really good flight deals. And I had known about the company before. I'd been a subscriber to the newsletter. And I think I had been applying a lot for remote jobs, and I had been getting rejected a lot for remote jobs as well. And so I saw this job. I think it was like a Facebook post that I had seen it, like maybe in a travel group, saying like, oh my God, dream job alert. Like, and I'm like, oh, I know this company. So I applied. And I think especially in these types of situations, it's really important to make yourself stand out in some way, because when you think about employers receiving job applications, they're getting so many of the same types of answers to the questions. Like, they're kind of seeing the same sorts of patterns of applicants in terms of maybe work experience or what they've done. One of the major things that I think made me stand out was while I was working as a teaching assistant in France, I had developed this website for teaching assistants called soyouthinkyoucanfrance.com. And it's basically city guides for all the cities in France that teaching assistants could be placed. And I had worked on this like feverishly for a long time, and like I used there's a teaching assistant Facebook group with like all of the teaching assistants in France. And I had kind of asked so many different people to fill out this Google form that I had created, just like in terms of best restaurants in the city or village, best bars, best things to do, places to see, typical like rents, like how much it would cost to rent an apartment or like live with a roommate. And I also had started a mini podcast with one of my friends who was another teaching assistant here in Toulouse. And we would just talk about like our adventures and misadventures teaching in a French high school and just living as Americans in France. And I think that really I was able to highlight that in my application in terms of like, this is a travel company kind of, and like, this is me living abroad and like kind of facilitating travel on a working level for many Americans. And so I think that got to it. That, and I don't know if I should say this, but I did embellish a few of my answers on the application, just going back to that point of they're getting the same responses all the time. So I think there was one question that was like, what's been your favorite, and they know this, I've told this to my past managers, so I'm not like outing myself. But the question was like, what's been like your favorite customer support experience? And I'm just like, as I started typing, I'm like, well, when I really feel like I have a voice, and I'm just like, you know what? Everyone's going to be writing this. So one of my friends in the past had worked in a customer support position for a cell phone case company in the US. And I remember that a customer had written in as like a Game of Thrones character and like saying like, I don't know, like I don't really know Game of Thrones that much, but they're like, I'm so and so from the house of so and so, and I'm requesting like a new speaker, because they also made speakers. And then my friend, he had like gone along with it and like really got full into character and was like really back and forth, and it made the customer support experience really great. And then he ended up getting like the CEO of the company saw the conversation. He ended up getting like promoted to a copywriter.
No way! That's amazing.
Yeah, I love this story.
Yes.
And I'm like, that's amazing. And so I was like, well, what if I just like took this and made it my own kind of? And so like, I don't know Game of Thrones, but I'm a really big House of Cards fan. And so I kind of like used the story myself, like, and I was like, well, one time I wrote in and I pretended I was like Frank Underwood from House of Cards, and then I ended up like ended up getting the job. Like it was one of those things where the interviews really felt supernatural. I didn't feel like I had to be someone I wasn't or talk like someone I wasn't. But anyway, a few months later, one of my like supervisors on the team was like, oh, I don't think we ever told you like why we really loved your application. Like we were going through it and your answers to the question were just like amazing and so different from everyone else. And I was like, sometimes you have to do that. It just shows that you're like willing to kind of think outside the box. You're not really wanting to stay in that cookie cutter box of what everyone else like is expected to do. And I ended up telling her, I was like, well, I have to tell you, actually, I kind of made it up. And she's like, oh, it's okay. I'm glad you did, because you've been doing great work. So
I think it shows creativity anyway, and this type of questions, they're not looking for a specific answer. They're looking for kind of what if, and this is exactly what you did, It doesn't change the person you are. And as you just said, during the interview, you actually felt like you didn't have to be someone you were not. So I think it's a great story.
Yeah, it's funny. It's just a funny story. And all the credit goes back to my friend who had done that, because otherwise I'd just be like, well, I don't know, like great customer support. I mean, the greatest customer support you get is kind of stuff where you don't really think about it. It's just like, oh, that was an easy experience, next. But like, so it was funny.
After that, you started your own web design business called Alex Morton Creative.
Mm-hmm.
And sorry, I had to read.
No, that's okay.
How did you feel like, okay, I need to do my own thing? And how did you become a web designer?
Yes. Okay. So actually, the becoming the web designer part came before finding the remote job. And I think that too added to setting myself apart as well. Just kind of a self-starter, and we talked a little bit before this of like pursuing my creative impulses, and I'm never satisfied to just stay in one place. Like I think I'm thriving the most when I'm really learning something new or pursuing a difficult goal, or if I think something is interesting and just kind of like discovering all that I can about it. So yeah, I had started web design at near the end of my teaching contract the second year in France. So still teaching in a high school. It was maybe 3 or 4 months before the end of my contract. And that was also when I was like, well, I don't want to be teaching. What else can I do? And then I started entertaining the idea of freelancing, of building a business around this. And so, yeah, I knew how to use Squarespace was the platform I used to design clients' websites. I ended up taking a course, an online course, like about geared toward like starting your own business and especially geared toward women. And I actually found a lot of my clients through that network. So it ended up, the course ended up paying for itself with what I was able to make back in terms of like client revenue. And then, yeah, when I got my job as my remote job in customer support, I was also doing the web design at the same time, but it ended up being way too much. And so I had finished up with one of my last clients, and I kind of put it on the back burner and wanted to focus 100% on my role within the company that I worked for.
Yeah, you're actually always learning new skills.
Yeah. That's been like, I think that's one of the major like motivators in my life, is just always learning something. And even, I think it can just be anything. Like it doesn't necessarily, like if it's something that you find interesting, even a little bit, it just makes, like I always say to I don't remember the last time I was bored, just because there's always something to do. There's always something, especially if you're pursuing something like what I'm doing now with Ladies Code Collective. Like there's always something to do in terms of sharing something online, or I don't know, editing a podcast. But I think we were just talking about it, Morgan, like about when you're working for yourself, it's a blessing and a curse, because there's always so much to do, but there's never like a time where when you're working as an employee, it's like, okay, we're done at this time, you go home, you come back to work the next day.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to like work to find that boundary between work and non-work.
After a while, this remote amazing job company they preferred to have something based in the US, so you couldn't work. So you had to choose between your dream job and going back to the US, or your dream life and your partner and everything in France. You obviously chose France.
Yeah.
And you learned again something new, which is coding. Can you talk about this? Where did you learn? Did you just read books? Did you take a course online? How long did it take? Can you take us through it?
Yeah. So that's, I started learning to code a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, while I was still working. Because yeah, when you're immersed in tech, when like a startup, you're always around different, I don't know, languages a little bit. Like, the engineering team is talking about something, the product team is talking about something, and you're like, wow, what in the world? There's so much like going on. There's so much opportunity here. And so I had started to see too that when there would be a big product release or feature release with the newsletter, with the company's newsletter and like the website or whatnot, all of the messages like in Slack would be celebrating the people on the engineering and product teams. And then I started to kind of think about it more, and I'm like, well, that's amazing, but where are the women on these teams? Like they were all men, and they were all male engineers and male people, like men in influential positions in the company. And I started to think to myself, like, I don't know. I mean, I really wanted to learn how to code just to be able to like put myself in these more influential positions, and to be able to make more interesting decisions within companies or within my own work itself. And I actually found one of the engineers on that team. He kind of became such a mentor and such like a early influence of when I was just starting to learn to code, and I kind of reached out like, oh God, I'm probably, I mean, I am such like a newbie, and I just like reached out to him just saying, I'm learning to code. Do you have any pointers on like what's going on? And he was just so welcoming. And so, because sometimes when you share that, I mean, I've done it before. I've shared it with other people who are very good programmers, and it's just been like, oh, okay, well, they kind of go immediately to critique your work, and you're like, okay, well, of course, like I'm not, of course, I'm just starting out, like, but it does feel a little bit off-putting, like you don't feel so comfortable going to these types of people. But this one, he really, every time I would share like a project that I was working on, or I would send him a link to a website that I had put together, he was so enthusiastic about it. And that really it made me think like, God, yeah, this is exciting. Like I could really do something with this. I could really go far with it, whether that's working for a company as an engineer or doing my own thing. Like I knew that programming and gaining more marketable skills would just inevitably open more doors for me. And I knew that, especially as someone who wanted to stay in France and work remotely, there's way more job opportunities available when you have these hard, really sought after skills than if you were just, an English major who had worked in customer support, which I was. And so I knew that I wanted, and that's not to say like, oh, if you're that, like, I just knew that for me, I wanted to go further than that. And so that's how I knew, okay, well, this is the step that I want to take. But then to go back to your point about, the company at the end of last year decided to move everything to the United States, to just do business in the United States. Before we had people working all over the world. And so it was it was just sad, because we really had this great experience all together. And then, business is business, and they, it was better for the company to focus solely on flight deals from the United States. And so I was given the choice, and actually a lot of us were given the choice to move back to the US and keep the job, or leave the company if we couldn't move back. And so I really, really went back and forth so much, like 3 months of just not depression, but just really stressed. Am I making the right decision? And the next day I would start all over, like, okay, I've decided I'm going to go back to the US. Okay. I don't know. It was just so much back and forth. And so then I was like, okay, I'm gonna leave the company. I can't move. I can't leave the life that I've built in France, and I've made so much effort to live in France, to be with the man I love. And, we have a dog, we have an apartment. And after like a couple weeks of feeling super sad about it, I just decided to just change my thoughts and, look at it as this amazing opportunity to really launch myself into coding and to switching my career. Before, like in the first few months, I was thinking about maybe trying to get a job with another company as a developer, which is still on the table. But now I'm kind of more thinking about, well, what if I started something on my own? What if I built my own sort of project? Because at the end of the day, I know I'm going to work so hard for whomever I work for. Like I put everything into it. I'm that kind of person. And then in my head, I'm like, why can't that person be me? Like, why is it maybe a disservice to myself if my one priority is to work to make a company rich and rich and rich? Or what if I like build something on my own and I'm able to create and design this life that I love and that is like designed on purpose and intentionally?
Oh, I love that.
Just
That
think
was very
that.
powerful.
Oh,
Yeah, this is
yeah.
exactly it, actually.
Yeah.
Why thinking about ourselves for other people? Like, what do I want? What skills should I gain to work for this company, for this boss? No, we should actually think about us, working for
Yeah.
us, and gaining skills for us. Not saying that everyone should be working for themselves and be self-employed, but actually gaining more skills and experiences for us first before thinking about anyone else. And I think that's
Yeah.
very interesting.
Yeah. And I think too, maybe as women too, I think we're really socialized to really think about maybe, putting everyone else before us, putting everyone's needs before our own. So it's almost, it can be revolutionary to really think that. And a lot of people might not like that either. A lot of people, like, well, what does she think? Like she can just do whatever she wants? And it's like, well, yeah, kind of. Like, I've just,
Yeah. Do
yeah, I
you have
mean,
anyone around you, maybe your family, your parents, or I don't know, friends who are self-employed or doing freelance? Because I think, it's kind of new. I think it's very millennial to think about remote working and working for themselves.
I do. I have a couple friends here in Toulouse who have started their own things, and I think actually what it is most is I really was exposed to the whole entrepreneurial mindset when I was teaching in France. I started really listening to a lot of podcasts about women who had been entrepreneurs or who are doing their own thing. Lots of groups on social media who are also doing their own thing. In terms of like my own family, I don't really think so. I never really had that idea that was possible. I'd say it's more like just based on things I consume online or like the sort of networks I try to be in online.
It feels like you trust your instinct a lot. You think about inside your head, not just what people might think. And I think it's very inspiring, especially for women. As you just said, we always think about other people first. And I'm very, because I'm not like that, I'm the opposite. I'm so interested in people who actually follow the instinct. What do I want? And I feel like I should do that. How do you trust your instinct like that? Is this just something you've always been good at? And how do you think it's the right decision?
Yeah. So yeah, I love that. One of like my kind of life mottos I always try to fall back on is to, in any situation in life, is to follow my creative impulses. And I think, yeah, like you said, I think that I've just been doing this since before I can even remember. I know that like in middle school and high school, we'd have opportunities to be part of like exchange programs. Like when I was in middle school, I did like this 2-week exchange program in Japan, in rural Japan, because I had seen something about it like in my school. There was a whole interview process and application process, and I just did it. Like there was no, in my mind, it was just like, yeah, like this is cool. I could see myself doing this. I want to do this. And then just one thing after another, it kind of just built on itself. My parents were always very encouraging in that sense. And in terms of like my upbringing, I had a pretty modest upbringing. I'm from Newport Beach, but by no means was I like, my parents were divorced, and like, when we were with my dad, we'd have to like take the bus, like, which in Newport Beach in Southern California, you don't take the bus.
Really?
You drives everywhere. Yeah. And in that sense, I had everything I needed, but I had a pretty modest, relatively speaking,
Yeah.
upbringing. But my parents were always so encouraging of like what I wanted to do. Even as I became an adult, like going from high school to university, I would tell them what I wanted to do, or like if I was going to like wanting to study abroad or do something on my own, they were very like, okay, like you do it, and we follow you, like if that's your decision. And I think another aspect of that too is that the fact that I was very financially independent from when I could start working at 16. And I think that also gives me, or individuals in that same situation, just being able to find that financial independence and just be able to like work for what I want. I put myself through college by working like 2 jobs at a time while studying. It gives you so much more freedom to just be the boss of your own life. And when maybe we're too tied down financially, like with our parents are funding our education, which is totally normal in America. I'm not knocking it whatsoever. I think maybe we're a little bit less likely to really dare to go further than what's expected of us. But yeah, I think tying it all back to that is just following your creative impulses. If something's interesting to you, I mean, you should just pursue it, because in the end, if you spend your days like that, you're going to just have lived a creative life overall.
Do you think sometimes that you have kind of like this imposter syndrome, because I know a lot of people do. And especially when you try to do so many things at the same time, because you've never actually had one job and that's it. When you were a teaching assistant in France, you were doing the podcast and you created a website. And then when you did this customer service job, you started learning how to code. So it must be really hard to know. Like in my brain, I know that I need to focus on one thing at a time to be good at it. And even though sometimes I'm like, but am I? Am I good at it?
I think what I've been learning, and still am continuing to learn, is that I think we all have thoughts of being an imposter, but I do think that all of those thoughts originate in our own minds. And it also originates in the thought, or in the, just being really too worried about what other people think of you. Now, I don't really feel as much of being an imposter as I mean, especially as when I was teaching, that I really did. And I was younger as well. So I didn't really have too much, I didn't really know myself as well as I do now. There will be rare occasions that I feel like, oh my God, maybe I'm a fraud. But then when I think about it more, I really try to get to the bottom of it, or I write in like my journal to try to suss everything out. Always at the bottom of it is I'm worried about what someone else might think or what other people think. And I think as soon as we can kind of put that out of our mind and be okay with the fact that, everyone will have an opinion if they want. Some will love it, some will not like it. And what you're doing is for those that love it. And then those that don't like it, I don't even really think about them. It's not for them. An example is like recently I had been sharing a story on Instagram, just like talking to the camera, and I don't even know what it was, but my boyfriend Arthur, he was looking at it, he's like, this is kind of weird. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's like, well, people might think that you're kind of like really, you kind of like yourself too much. And I'm like, well, I do like myself. If people think it's weird, it's not for them, and they'll just scroll past it. Like, it's for people who maybe they'll connect with it, or maybe they'll find it funny. And so I don't know, I think there's so much influence around us about that really keeps us small and keeps us comfortable.
Yeah. And Arthur is French, right?
Arthur's French, yeah.
Yes, because
that's a whole
yes.
different.
Because I was going to say, this is a very French thing to say. Mm-hmm. I live in the UK and you're American, so it's very similar, this kind of culture. Even though it's different, but there is more similarities than the French people. French people are very judgmental, and they judge themselves as well without even hearing what people are thinking. They're just assuming people will think a certain way of them. And so we're always very careful of how we look, what we say, how we act.
I know. I swear, it's so interesting. Yeah, just being, I guess, being an American here, or being someone who really is, I love pushing the limits too of like myself. And like, I've had so many conversations with French friends who like all, for example, if I'm out with friends, recently we had like a bachelor party for a friend, and we were out dancing at night, and I was just like dancing, like I didn't care. And we were talking, and she's like, God, it's so interesting to watch you, because you really seem like you just don't care about what other people think. And I was like, yeah, I know, that's what's nice about sometimes not being French, but living in a French culture, where you can use that card as saying like, well, I'm not from here, so I can kind of just do it. And then people are like, well, yeah, she's not from here, like we don't really accept it, but
oh my God, this is so interesting. Yes, and that's why I love living in London, because London is very cosmopolitan, so there's a lot of cultures, and in London no one cares, British people or not, no one cares about how you look and how you act. You're actually, people are expecting you to act crazy, and if you blend too much, people will be like, are you okay? You need a personality seed or something like that, So, and that's what I love, because I know in France, for example, I always compare myself to a chameleon, so always trying to fit in places where I've been to and where I've moved to and stuff like that. And I feel like in London, I really felt like, oh, okay, I can be myself and it will be fine. And as you just said, you have this excuse, I'm not from here. So yeah, it's the French craziness,
Yeah.
for my
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah, I know, I just wish, yeah, it's just it's the rules are real here for society, and I love it. I mean, there's also like there's so many things that I think Americans, like other friends, can complain about, but it's all part of it. You can complain as much as you want about, yeah, people being a little stringent or like not expressing themselves because you just don't do that. But then there's also like the beautiful things about like, the culture and the art that you're surrounded by, and just like, yeah, and the like levels of conversation that you can have with different people. But yeah, it's very, and yeah, it's maybe even more, maybe that even makes it more, I don't know, like it trains me to be even more myself, because you're kind of pushing the limit. And when you go back home, where, yeah, like I think it's the same in America, it's like everyone is encouraged to be very individualistic, and especially in terms of like if you're gonna like start a business or something. I mean, America runs on people starting, the self-made man or woman. And I think, yeah, it just makes it more like, okay, well, I'm already comfortable being myself in a place that it's weird when you do something that's like that no one else does. Then I'd be even more comfortable being myself when I'm, somewhere else or back home.
A question I always ask at the end of an episode is about success. And what is success for you? And do you feel successful?
Yeah, success for me is just waking up every day and being happy to be doing what you're doing. And, I think it's also having hard goals that you're working toward and finding joy in the process.
Mm.
Instead of just working, and having this far off idea of what it means to be successful. And then once you achieve that, okay, it's like a moment of happiness. And then, okay, well, I'm not happy until I have twice this much, and then working. I think success really comes from being happy in the systems that you've built for yourself, and the day after day after day. And I do feel successful. I don't think I'm where I thought I would have ended up, but I don't think I ever knew. I don't think I ever really had an idea of where I would have ended up. And so I think also that I feel like I'm at the very beginning of a new chapter. And I don't think success is something that we need to strive for in the far off future. I think it's something that we can have every single day.
Yeah, oh, I think that's very great. That's true. That's completely true.
Yeah.
I think you need to be successful in the way you're living your life. This is, and that can be different for anybody, and that can be different as well for you as an individual. And in 5 years, it will be maybe different. Would you like to talk about this little event, the coding thing that you're doing soon?
Yeah, of course. Oh, thank you. Yeah. So yeah, I'm going to be giving my first ever conference talk at it's a virtual conference this year. It's usually held in New York, but it's called Codeland Distributed. And my talk is on being utterly fearless in your pursuit of learning to code. And it was kind of a crazy thing because I had submitted this proposal to talk, and I was like, yeah, I'll just throw it in there. But I got chosen, and I'm surrounded by other like developers at Microsoft and all these like amazing experts. And in my head, I mean, that's an example. It's like, well, you can feel imposter syndrome maybe, or you can just be like, yeah, actually I was chosen for a reason. And even if it's not clear right now, I still have the opportunity to like maybe connect with at least one person in the audience who may be in that same position. So that talk will be on July 23rd. I just got the time for my specific talk. It's at 11:51 Eastern Standard Time. So that's here in France, 5:51 p.m. But yeah, it's an online conference. It's free to sign up for the talks, and then the ticket prices increases if you want to attend any workshops, online workshops. But yeah, I'm excited for that, and it'll be my first ever talk.
That's amazing. I'll put the link in the description
Oh,
anyway.
thank you.
Well,
Cool.
so it was really nice to talk to you and catch up because we met once ages
Yeah.
ago. And yeah, thank you so, so much for your time and sharing your story.
Yeah, well, thank you. Anytime you want to talk about French or living abroad as an expat, I'm more than happy to as well.
Voila, that's the end of this episode. And I want to thank Alex for telling her story. Please share it on your social media and it might reach someone who will feel inspired to follow their dream. Don't forget, life is short. Live it to the fullest.